Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and I welcome all of you back to another Rage video, where tonight, ladies and gentlemen, as the month of August is slowly but surely coming to an end, today being the 28th, I think it's now just about time that we move on to, honestly, one of... as much as you heard me get all emotional and really invested in Symptom of the Universe, and that's quite out there because of what Geezer Butler manages to convey through Dreams. With that being said, you would be forgiven in thinking that there was anything better, not just on the A side or the B side, but on the whole of Sabotage in general. Well, for those who remember back in the day, I used to say that Sabotage is one of those albums where it tricks you because every single song, with the exception of one or two, is better than the song that came before it. Symptom of the Universe being better than Hole in the Sky, and bear in mind Hole in the Sky set the benchmark quite high, well, at least as far as Black Sabbath songs go. And you're probably asking yourselves, how exactly can Megalomania be better than Symptom of the Universe? I admit, ladies and gentlemen, that when I was doing this song for the very first time, I thought that myself, but ladies and gentlemen, I can show you that it can go even better. So strap yourselves in, ladies and gentlemen, because we've got 10 minutes of one of perhaps Black Sabbath's most underrated song ever. So, if you guys want to check out the original video for yourselves, links will all be in the description down below. Let's begin. Megalomania in 3, 2, 1, and...
Obsessed with fantasy, possessed with my schemes. I mix reality with pseudo-robot dreams. The ghost of violence was something I'd seen. I sold my soul to be the human I've seen. How could this poison be the dream?
I know what you're probably thinking about right now, because it seems like I'm building Megalomania as something unholy and something that is the pinnacle, like the almost the absolute benchmark of for Black Sabbath. And I don't disagree with you. And this is even counting the days of when Ronnie James Dio was in Black Sabbath, God rest his soul. But what I'm trying to convey at this point is that it's what they're doing now versus what they're going to be doing in a very short moment exemplifies exactly what they're talking about. Because for those who don't know about Megalomania, it's sort of... It gives a person almost a split personality disorder that sort of borders on schizophrenia, in which there's almost like two extremes in one body. One that is obsessive with power, and another that is almost obsessive with the opposite, or rather, just the normal person. And then there's an alter ego that's completely obsessive with whole power fantasies. And Reddit is making noises about me again. And one of the things that people who are megalomaniacs start to become is they become very delusional in their beliefs of power for its own sake. And it doesn't take much if you just go through the first two verses. I mean, you get stuff like obsessed, 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 obsessed with fantasy, possessed with my schemes. I mixed reality with pseudo-god dreams. The ghost of violence was something I'd seen. I sold my soul to be the human obscene. You can tell instantly he's sort of Ozzy is sort of losing his mind, trying to wonder why is he so. I mean, even in the first verse, he goes through I hide myself inside the shadows. He's hiding himself in his own mind, where only his own thoughts can comfort him. And then he's looking again and saying, you know what, I don't like this, because I'm now becoming obsessed with power fantasies, revenge, taking over the world, that sort of thing. But you know what? I say take over the world. Maybe that's being a little bit too... a bit silly an idea, because this isn't about a guy who wants to take over the world. This is a guy who's simply wondering why he's having these thoughts in the first place. It's not so much that this guy is evil. It's the song really doesn't have anything to do with, questions of morality. It's rather a question of why do we think this way, or what's happening us to make us think this way. And of course, if we're going to look at it almost as a dual personality type, this is pretty much on the face. This is like almost the normal guy, or even the split personality that is so unbelievably sad and depressed, or this just could be the honest to God the face of it. Because I think that's almost ingenious, the way they sort of like try and layer this song out, as that the first third is just what's on the surface. So at a first glance, it's like listening to something that's slow, that's something that's quite deep and melancholy, and stuff that's rather disturbing and grey. Even back in 1975, this sort of material, I think, would be kind of like more tabooed, to be honest, on radio, in my opinion. I don't know. There's been loads of stuff like that around the years anyway, but I think when it comes to Black Sabbath, and based on what we're going to hear next, you'll probably be forgiven in thinking that it's more than just what's on the surface. How do I know this? Well, you hear that? You hear the piano and how it's building up? In fact, you know what? That's better. And there we go, ladies and gentlemen. Still, in my opinion, the most underrated Black Sabbath song ever made. That was Megalomania. The whole transition to now we're examining Ozzy's mind to the point where he has to not only accept that perhaps he's beginning to realize exactly that this is a part of him, and also he has to wonder exactly why exactly it's here and what's it doing to him. And now he's just learning to live with it and wondering if it's entirely that bad to think that. I think it's safe to say that in the ending, I think they come to some sort of like compromise. In the fifth verse, I'm really digging schizophrenia, the best of the earth. I'll chase my soul in the fires of hell. Peace of mind eluded me, but now it's all mine. I simply try, but he wants me to fail. Now he's almost looking at it as if, well, if he really wants him to feel like he wants to fail, then it's his duty to make sure he exists. I mean, this you can't really see, I mean, you could say this is almost like one of those Thanos sort of scenarios where he subconsciously wants to lose, but what exactly is it that he's got to lose in the first place? Feel it slipping away, slipping into tomorrow. Now I found my happiness, providence of sorrow. No more lies, I got wise. I despise the way I worship you, yeah. Now I'm free, let me see. Now instead I won't be led by you now. I love, honest to God, just the way it ends in, it's a bit obscure as to whether or not, is it two personalities that are still surviving, or is it just one voice inside Ozzy's head now telling him where to go? That's the great way about how this ends, is it kind of makes you wonder whether or not the decisions are just, because I think the issue at hand is that it's, some people take it for granted, saying that schizophrenia is just something you can get over and something that just you stop being. Unfortunately, that's absolutely not the case, and certainly from what we know now compared to back in 1975 is that people who are sadly schizophrenic are very, they have very strange ideas, and they have certain very wild some concepts that are so out there, from believing that we're being investigated by the FBI hacking into satellites to goodness knows what, visions of power, or even visions that are so graphic in detail about violence and power that you sort of wonder exactly what on earth comes about some people to start possessing such ideas. But that's probably at the next extent we have to go to, as to whether or not, well, what exactly makes a split personality? Now I'm gonna do a bit of investigating right now, because split personalities are a fascination on this, in my opinion, because it seems like I actually once had an idea to write a script for a horror movie about this entity that would possess generation after generation of, it would possess one person and then go through generation to generation almost at random. Like when one person dies, then another person from the next generation becomes infected, and it sort of works simply to want people to start, it works in a man's subconscious to start having him kill somebody, and then when the cycle ends, the idea that perhaps insanity is inherent or even infectious. I don't really want to. It would be a hard thing to sort of like prove, because some people would almost want to pass it off as like schizophrenia, and I sort of don't really want to do that. I would kind of like want to make it clear that they're both like very, very different. But I suppose, again, when you think about it, maybe the idea of a serial killer who was schizophrenic isn't necessarily a bad idea on the surface of it. I mean, again, I'm thinking in terms of like, terms of movie writing in a second, but let's actually, now we can go into split personality disorder, or dissociative identity disorder, so DID. Previously known dissociative identity disorder, previously known as multiple personality disorder, is thought to be a complex psychological condition that is likely caused by many factors, including severe trauma during early childhood. Well, from what I understand is that Ozzy Osbourne did not exactly have the greatest of upbringings, so it doesn't surprise me, strangely enough, that Ozzy or maybe even Butler or even Bill Ward came towards Butler, or they put their hands up and saying, I want to write a story about this, about some ideas I had, because we've heard stuff from Black Sabbath before, certainly in Symptom of the Universe. There's about Geezer's strange ideas about the things he dreams about. So so I suppose we can't necessarily rule out the idea that there was some very specific influences going into this. Early childhood trauma, usually extreme, repetitive, physical, sexual, or emotional abuse. Dissociative identity disorder is a severe form of dissociation, a mental process which produces a lack of connection in a person's thoughts, memories, feelings, actions, or sense of identity. Dissociative identity disorder is thought to stem from a combination of factors that may include trauma experienced by a person with the disorder. The dissociative aspect is thought to be a coping mechanism. The person literally shuts off or disassociates themselves from a situation or experience that's too violent, traumatic, or painful to assimilate with their conscious self. And it's, in case you're wondering, it's not necessarily the same thing as having the concept of like imaginary friends or that sort of thing, because the thing is that sometimes in those cases it's not necessarily attributed to childhood trauma or a very particularly very menacing and threatening event. But certainly, perhaps maybe in the case of certain people with the disorder, I'd like to imagine in some way that does maybe the psychological aspect maybe not necessarily there in early childhood, but may become a feature that some people might inhabit later on in life, is that they see why or understand why people utilize violence in such ways to get what they want by punishing innocent people. So maybe when you look at it like that, there could be something to be said about, give me 1 second to think. There could be something absolutely to be said about, well, how early does it, or rather, when it comes to a question of violence, or does a person understand why it's good or bad, or what exactly, why exactly do they want to think about violence like that? Is it because I do think it starts to become a feature of exposure more than anything. Like, you become exposed to violence and then you become introduced to it, and even if you're scared of it, you find out reasons why you're scared of it, because it's strange and unknown, and it's something you don't necessarily believe in because you've been taught otherwise to be fearful of people who utilize violence. Who is at risk of DID? Research indicates that the cause of DID is likely a psychological response to interpersonal and environmental stresses, particularly early childhood years, when emotional neglect or abuse may interfere with personality development. That's a good point. I like the fact that they're mentioning development, because again, this is a person's early years, and cognitive or even neurological development has to occur in every single child, so they understand about how the world works and why things are the way they are. And even when they're in their adult years, as a result of the miracle that is known as adult neurogenesis, which is the lobe just at the back of the head. It's sort of like a couple of inches above the top of the spine. Is that's actually where some certain things that cannot necessarily be not necessarily couldn't be conveyed by the central nervous system, but it's something that can trigger memories, or if you smell something in particular that you sort of remembered from an earlier year. That's how you can like indicate smells, and you could associate with them because you have a sort of a connection towards them from something you might have smelled a very long time ago. Like if tomorrow you started smelling fresh cookies in the kitchen, and that could lead to a memory you might have had many years ago where you had cookies that were freshly baked, and you become familiar with the smell. I know that's being a little bit out there, but let's take that for an example, and if we're going to throw this into the case of megalomania, then perhaps there was something missing, something that Ozzy's describing that he never seemed to have had. And I honestly think it comes down to the subject of love, ladies and gentlemen, because how exactly can you exhibit or inhibit violence and call it love? Because violence is not love. I think that's the point I'm trying to make, is that you could say Ozzy's, or at least the character in the story is that as opposed to being shown affection or love, he was simply shown the backhand of somebody with a hand like a leather shovel. And it's especially in the case of when you hear how it begins again and how bleak everything is. The ghost of violence was something I'd seen. This is trauma. It's something he remembers. But this is an aspect of adult neurogenesis as well, because it doesn't just limit you from good experiences, but rather bad experiences caused by amygdala-like clusters inside the brain called the... I do think they're called the amygdala, and that's what triggers aspects of fear and being scared. And sometimes you have to pay attention to them because it could be out of fear of something you simply don't understand, a bit like talkSPORT presenters or people on the news. I sold my soul to be the human obscene. Now we hear Ozzy just talked about how he wants to be on his own, so all he wants now is just peace and quiet, and it isn't so much that he sold his soul literally, but rather he sold the things that perhaps keep a person from going insane. Like friendships, socializing, money, all sorts of things. How could this poison be the dream of my soul? Yeah, how is it that this is what Ozzy thinks that he wants? How can anyone think this is actually what they want? How did my fantasies take complete control? Yeah. And I think it's quite interesting he talks about now, is this his fantasy? Is it a fantasy of his to suffer? Or rather, is the split personality in Ozzy's head almost just out there to make him suffer? Like, it is like the representation of someone he once knew in life, who's now has such a stranglehold on Ozzy's mind that he just... It's fear, ladies and gentlemen. That's what it is. It's fear that you're going to get smacked again, or you're never going to be rid of me because you'll find something new to be afraid of. That's what a lot of people don't realize. What they do is that when they exhibit violence, is that you're almost sending a very clear message, because it's not just physical, but you're sending a clear message in their head, because if you do that again to them, you're going to get far worse. And if this is happening at a very young age, of course they're not going to say anything again, because this is a new experiencing, feeling that amount of pain. Something that children, sadly, don't understand, or probably will never understand. It's a terrible thing, ladies and gentlemen, don't get me wrong. But if there is something to be said about how grim the whole situation really is that when it does get to the third verse and everything picks up, and then we really look inside Ozzy's mind and how he seems a lot more alive and a lot more passionate, is that it's when we begin to see the real man emerge. And now you see that the conflict he suffers from between trying to get away from the fact that he's been held down all his life, or rather, is it even that necessary to get rid of him? Because it's not so much that he can't, although, again, that has its own problems in itself, but rather, is it the only thing that is technically keeping him sane? Or is this his other personality telling him this subconsciously? So he's sort of playing, and it's a war against himself, a war of his own mind. Was it wise to disguise how I try to get away from you now? Or is there a way that I can pay? Or is it true that I have to stay with you now? Ozzy now has to, like... He doesn't seem to... I think he's only now just beginning to understand is that it's not something he has to live with, meaning that, no, there is no way of getting rid of it. And it's a dreadful thing. Like I said before, it's a dreadful thing people have to suffer through schizophrenia, because there isn't necessarily a cure, but rather there are ways to help people cope with such a debilitating illness. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I hope this has at least been some way informative, because how many other songs out there do you hear nowadays that tackle subject matter like this? I said it before that Megalomania is perhaps the most underrated Black Sabbath song of them all, because this and many others besides, they feel more real because they tackle real life and they tackle the things that happen that aren't pleasant in real life, but things we have to simply learn to accept. And once we figure that out, then maybe we should start really considering that maybe we'll think differently when we see people who are very unfortunate to suffer through schizophrenia. But so anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this reaction video to one of my personal favorites. Please leave your thoughts and comments in the comment section down below. Let me know what you guys thought of Megalomania for yourselves, and I cannot wait to see all of you guys again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now.